The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of golden sand under the burning twin suns. Winds howled across the dunes, lifting waves of dust that blinded the eyes and cut the skin. For most, this place was death. For the young alien girl struggling through the storm, it was worse than death. It was abandonment. Her small feet sank with each step, her long robe torn, her lips cracked with thirst. Her breath came in broken gasps as the sand swallowed her deeper and deeper. She had been left here, buried alive, by cruel hands that once called themselves family. Her stepmother's voice still echoed in her ears, cold and merciless. "No one will find you here, little burden." The girl tried to scream, but the desert ate her voice. Her body grew weaker, her knees gave way, and she fell face first into the hot ground. Sand filled her mouth, her eyes, her nose, and still she tried to move, but her strength was gone. Her heart slowed, her chest barely rising. She whispered with her last breath, "Please, someone, hear me," and then, silence, far away beyond the dunes. A human traveler walked alone. He was not supposed to be here. Not in this forbidden wasteland, but his curiosity was stronger than fear. He carried a scanner, an old human device that beeped softly whenever it caught strange energy in the air. Suddenly, the scanner flashed red, picking up a faint signal, weak, fading, like a heartbeat lost in the storm. The human frowned, tightening his grip on the device. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice low against the wind. He turned toward the signal, his boots sinking into the shifting sand. Each step was heavy, but he pressed on, following the sound. The storm grew stronger. Yet the signal grew clearer. It was calling him, pulling him toward something or someone buried beneath the desert. At last, he saw a small hand sticking out of the sand, pale against the golden dunes. His eyes widened. And without hesitation, he ran, falling to his knees. He dug with both hands, the sand burning his skin. The girl's lifeless face appeared, covered in dust, her lips blue, her chest unmoving. For a moment, his heart sank. She looked gone, too far gone. But something in him refused to accept it. "No," he whispered, fiercely. "Not today." He pulled her out, cradling her fragile body in his arms. She was cold, her head limp, her pulse almost gone. He laid her down and opened his pack, pulling out human medical gear. A small injector, a portable stim unit, tools he had carried for survival. His hands moved fast, pressing against her chest, forcing air into her lungs, again and again. He tried, his teeth gritted against the storm. "Breathe," he ordered. "Come on, breathe." Minutes felt like hours. The desert roared around him, sand whipping his face. But he didn't stop. He fought against the silence of death, against the cruelty of fate. At last, a faint cough escaped her lips. The girl's chest rose weakly. Her fingers twitched, her eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and fear. The human let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Relief washed over him, but he kept his hands steady. "You're alive," he said softly, though she could barely hear him. The girl blinked, her vision blurred, seeing the strange figure above her, not her own kind, not anyone she had ever trusted, a human. Her people had always spoken of humans as enemies, as dangerous outsiders, but this human's eyes burned not with hatred, but with determination. She tried to move, to pull away, but her body was too weak. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why? Why save me?" But the human only shook his head, pulling his cloak tighter around her to shield her from the storm. "Because you're still alive," he said, "and as long as you're alive, I won't let the desert take you." The storm raged on, the dunes shifting endlessly. But in that moment, under the deadly suns, a spark of defiance burned bright. One life, almost lost. Now, carried by the hands of someone who refused to let go, the desert had buried her once. but it would not claim her again, not while a human still stood against it. The storm did not stop. It screamed across the desert with 1,000 sharp voices, yet the human refused to let go of the fragile girl in his arms. She was breathing now, faint and broken, but she was alive. And that was enough for him. He wrapped his cloak tighter around her small body and leaned against the dune. Shielding her as best as he could, the desert wanted to bury her again, to drag her back into silence, but he would not allow it. His name was Daniel, a wanderer, a human who had left his home colony to explore the forbidden lands. Most avoided this place. Stories said no one returned. Stories spoke of curses and death, but Daniel was different. He wanted answers. He wanted truth. And now fate had given him something else, a life to protect. The girl stirred, her lips cracked, her voice weak. Why? Why didn't you leave me there? Daniel looked at her, sand sticking to her face, fear in her eyes. He could see the mistrust, the wall she had built inside herself. Slowly, he poured water from his flask and held it to her lips. Because life is life, he said quietly, even if the desert or people try to end it, I won't let them. She sipped the water, coughing, but her eyes never left him. A human saving her was not a story she had ever been told. The storm began to ease, the winds settling into whispers. Daniel stood, lifting her again with surprising strength. Her body was light, too light. As if hunger had already eaten most of her strength, he carried her toward the jagged rocks rising in the distance, hoping to find shelter. Each step was heavy, but his will was heavier. The desert pressed against him, trying to break him, yet he pressed harder. Finally, they reached a hollow space under the rocks. A shallow cave. He set her down gently, his back aching, his throat dry. But he did not stop moving. He started a small fire, the flames flickering weakly against the cold desert night. The girl lay silently, watching him, her alien eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She whispered again, You should not help me, my people. They hate yours. Daniel sat across from her, his face serious. Maybe they do. Maybe they always will. But I don't care what others say. I make my own choices. There was a long pause, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The girl looked away. Clutching the cloak around her small body, her thoughts swirled like the desert winds. Memories of betrayal, the cold face of her stepmother, the feeling of sand filling her lungs. Why would a human of all creatures pull her back from death? It made no sense, and yet, here she was, alive because of him. Daniel studied her, noting the bruises on her arms, the cuts on her hands. This was no accident. She had not simply wandered into the storm. Who left you there? He asked gently. The girl's lips trembled. She turned her face from him, but a tear slipped down her cheek. My stepmother, she whispered. She said I was useless, that no one would ever care if I was gone. Her voice broke, the words cutting deeper than any wound. Daniel clenched his fists, anger burning inside him. To abandon a child in the desert, to let her die buried under sand, it was cruelty beyond words. He moved closer, his tone steady. Listen to me. You are not useless. You are not forgotten. Not while I'm here. She blinked, stunned by the fire in his voice. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever fought for her. She wanted to believe him, but fear still chained her. Heart, why risk your life? She asked softly, why fight the desert for me? Daniel looked at the flames, his eyes shadowed. Because death should never win so easily, he said. I've lost people before, and I swore if I ever had the chance, I would fight harder next time. Silence filled the cave, but it was not empty, it was heavy with meaning. The girl pulled the cloak tighter. her eyes drifting shut as exhaustion overcame her. Daniel sat awake, guarding her. His back against the rock, his weapon ready at his side. The desert was quiet now, but he knew it was never safe for long. Somewhere out there, danger still hunted. And he had a feeling that saving her had only been the beginning. As the fire burned low, Daniel looked at her again. This fragile life he had pulled from the sands, a stranger, an alien, someone his people might call an enemy, but to him, she was proof that even in the cruelest places, there was still hope. And he had defied death itself to keep that hope alive. The desert could rage, the stars could fall, the world could turn against him. But Daniel had made his choice. He would protect her, no matter what it cost, for the desert had taken many lives. But not hers, not while a human still breathed. The night was cold, the fire weak, and silence heavy in the cave. Daniel kept watch, his eyes scanning the dunes outside, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the girl he had saved. She slept fitfully, her body trembling from both exhaustion and memories that haunted her dreams. Every so often she whimpered, whispering words too soft for him to understand, but he could see the fear etched into her face, even in sleep. When the first light of dawn touched the desert, the girl stirred. Her alien eyes opened, bright and strange. Filled with sudden panic, she sat up quickly, clutching the cloak tighter around her. Her breathing fast, her gaze landed on Daniel, and fear spread across her features like fire across dry sand. She pushed herself back against the stone wall, her voice sharp though weak. "Stay away, human," she whispered, her hands shaking. Daniel raised both hands slowly, his movements calm, his voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "You collapsed in the storm. I only pulled you out." But his words did little to ease her fear. Her people had always told her stories of humans, monsters in flesh, destroyers of worlds, and now here one sat before her, close enough to touch. Close enough to end her life in a single strike. Her heart pounded, her throat tight. She wanted to believe he had saved her out of kindness, but her mind refused to trust. She had been betrayed too many times before, and trust was not something she could give freely. She pulled the cloak tighter and whispered again, "Why? Why save me? What do you want from me?" Daniel sighed, his eyes tired but unwavering. "I want nothing," he said, "only to see you alive." She stared at him, searching for lies in his face, but his expression was steady. His gaze clear, no anger, no greed, no cruelty. Just determination, and that confused her more than anything. The girl tried to stand, but her legs trembled beneath her. She stumbled, nearly falling, and Daniel instinctively stepped forward. She flinched, her hand raised as if to strike her eyes. Wide with terror, Daniel froze, lowering his arms again, keeping his distance. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I won't touch you unless you ask me to." His words surprised her. Few in her life had ever cared about her choice. Her stepmother had only commanded, punished, and finally abandoned her. But this human spoke with patience, as if her fear mattered, as if she mattered. She looked at him for a long time, her lips pressed together, then sat back down, though her eyes never left him. The day grew hotter as the suns climbed higher. Daniel shared food with her, simple rations he carried in his pack. She ate slowly, each bite cautious, as if she still suspected poison, but hunger won, and soon the edge of her fear dulled, replaced by curiosity. Her eyes wandered over him, over his strange clothes, the scars on his hands, the worn device at his belt. Finally, she asked, "Why are you even here?" Humans never cross the desert. Daniel leaned back against the rock, his face shadowed by the firelight. "Maybe I go where I'm not supposed to," he said. "Maybe I don't believe in borders made by fear." His voice was calm, but there was weight in it. the weight of a man carrying memories he did not share. She tilted her head, puzzled by his answer, but before she could ask more, a distant sound carried across the dunes. The girl froze, her eyes widening. Her alien ears caught the sound clearer than Daniel's the hum of engines. The thrum of approaching hunters. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "They're coming." Daniel stiffened, his hand going to his weapon. "Who?" he asked, though part of him already knew. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ones who left me to die." The words hung in the air like a curse. Daniel's jaw tightened. Anger flashing in his eyes, he had already defied the desert to keep her alive. Now it seemed he would have to defy more than nature. The girl hugged the cloak closer, her fear returning, her body shaking as the sound grew louder. Daniel moved to the entrance of the cave, standing tall against the storm of sand rising once again. Behind him, the girl's thoughts spiraled. Her people had taught her humans were cruel. Yet here was one who shielded her, fed her, gave her life back. And her own kind, the ones she should have trusted, were the very ones hunting her. Her heart twisted in fear and confusion. She did not know which terrified her more, the hunters outside, or the human who refused to let her go. Daniel's voice cut through the silence, firm and unshaken. "Stay here," he said. "No one is taking you back to that desert." And as the sound of the hunters drew closer, the girl realized that this human, this stranger, was ready to fight for her in a way no one ever had. The cave shook as the sound of engines roared closer. Dust fell from the stone ceiling, and the girl curled into the corner, her eyes wide with terror. Daniel stood firm at the entrance, his weapon drawn, his heart steady. He had faced storms, hunger, and loneliness in this desert. But now he faced something greater, living enemies who wanted the girl dead. The hunter shadows grew across the dunes, dark figures riding sleek desert skimmers. Their armor glimmered under the rising suns, their weapons sharp and ready. The girl whispered, "They won't stop. They'll find me. They'll kill us." Both, her voice cracked, her body trembling. But Daniel turned and met her gaze with fire in his eyes. "Then we don't let them," he said, his tone calm but filled with iron. He crouched beside her, placing his pack between them. Inside were tools, a half-broken scanner, spare power cells, coils of wire, all the scraps he carried for survival. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice steady. The girl hesitated, her lips pressed tightly together. Fear burned inside her. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no lies, only determination. At last, she whispered, "Yes, I trust you." Daniel moved quickly, his hands skilled, turning scraps into traps. He rigged the scanner to send false signals. Wires stretched across the cave mouth, stones balanced for a quick collapse. The girl watched him, her fear mixing with awe. Humans were supposed to be destroyers, yet here he was, building, protecting, planning to fight, not for himself, but for her. When the hunters arrived, their voices echoed across the rocks. "She must be here. The sands don't lie," one growled, his voice deep and cruel. Another laughed coldly. "Her stepmother will be pleased when we bring back proof of her death this time." The girl closed her eyes, her chest tightening at the reminder of her betrayal. Daniel's jaw clenched, fury rising inside him. He had heard enough. The hunters stepped into the cave, but the moment their boots hit the sand, Daniel's trap snapped. The scanner burst with a flash of light. Stones crashed down, dust filled the air. The hunters shouted in surprise. Stumbling, Daniel moved like lightning, firing a blast that sent one sprawling back into the storm. The girl gasped, her hands over her mouth, watching the human fight with fierce precision. But the hunters were strong, trained, and they regrouped quickly. One aimed at Daniel, firing energy bolts that scorched the stone walls. Daniel ducked, rolling behind cover, returning fire with steady hands. He fought not for glory, not for survival alone, but to keep the promise he had made to protect her. Every shot, every move, was an act of defiance against the cruelty that had tried to bury her. The girl wanted to hide, wanted to run, but something inside her stirred. She saw him fighting for her, bleeding for her, risking everything for a life her own people had thrown away, and for the first time, she felt a spark of courage. She grabbed a stone, sharp at the edge, and when one hunter came close, she hurled it with all her strength. It struck his mask, cracking the visor, and he stumbled back with a roar. Daniel glanced at her, surprised, then gave a quick nod of respect before turning back to the fight. The storm outside grew stronger, winds howling through the broken cave. Sand whipped into their faces, turning the battle into chaos. Daniel pressed harder, using the storm as cover, his blasts cutting through the haze. At last, the hunters, battered and confused, fell back into the dunes, retreating into the swirling storm. Their voices faded, promising they would return. Silence filled the cave again, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. Daniel lowered his weapon, his chest heaving, sweat and sand covering his face. The girl stared at him, her hands still trembling. But not only from fear, for the first time in her life, someone had stood between her and death. Not because of duty, not because of gain, but because they refused to let her be taken. She whispered, "Why do you keep fighting for me? You don't even know me." Daniel sat down beside the fire, his weapon resting at his side. "I don't need to know you," he said. "I just know you didn't deserve what they did to you, and as long as I breathe, I won't let them win." His voice was steady, but there was pain hidden inside. Pain from old scars he did not speak of. The girl lowered her eyes, her heart heavy with confusion. Her people had told her humans were heartless. But this human was nothing like the stories. He had pulled her from the sands, given her food, water, fire, and now protection against hunters who should have been her own kin. Her stepmother had buried her, but this stranger had fought to keep her alive. The desert was cruel. Her past was crueler, but here, in the shadows of stone and firelight, she felt something she had never known: safety. For the first time, she began to wonder. Maybe everything she had been told about humans was wrong. Maybe the real monster was not the man who sat across from her, but the one who had left her to die beneath the desert sands. The storm passed, but danger did not. Daniel knew the hunters would return, stronger and better prepared. The desert was vast, but it offered little safety, and their cave would soon be found again. If they wanted to survive, they had to move. At dawn, Daniel packed his gear, tightening the straps, checking his weapon. The girl watched him with tired eyes, still weak, but stronger than before. She wanted to speak, to ask where they would go, but the words stuck in her throat. Finally, she whispered, "We can't escape them. They'll find us." Daniel looked at her, his face calm, his eyes burning with quiet fire. "Then we'll make it harder for them," he said. "We'll give them a chase they'll never forget." They left the cave and stepped into the open desert. The suns blazed overhead, the sand shifting underfoot like waves on a golden sea. Daniel led the way, steady and determined, while the girl struggled to keep pace. Her legs shook, but she refused to fall, holding on to the strength she had found in his presence. Behind them, far on the horizon, shadows moved. The hunters had returned, and the chase had begun. Engines roared as the skimmers cut across the dunes. Dust rose like smoke, marking their trail in the empty wasteland. Daniel scanned the land, searching for cover, for anything that could give them an advantage. He saw rocky ridges ahead, jagged teeth breaking through the endless sand. "That way," he said, pulling her gently forward. The girl stumbled, nearly falling, but Daniel caught her arm, steadying her. His grip was firm, not cruel, and she felt a strange spark of safety even as fear gripped her heart. She glanced at the hunters gaining ground. Their laughter carried on the wind, her breath quickened. Her body screamed for rest, but she kept moving, somewhere deep inside. She refused to give her stepmother the victory she wanted. The chase grew fiercer. The hunters firing blasts that scorched the dunes around them. Sand erupted, the air filled with heat and noise. Daniel pulled her close, shielding her with his body as they ran. Every step was a battle, every breath a defiance against the desert and their enemies. The girl's heart pounded, not just with fear, but with something else in awakening she did not understand. They reached the rocky ridge, climbing quickly into its jagged shelter. The hunters slowed, circling, engines growling like beasts. Daniel pressed his back against the stone, his weapon ready, his eyes sharp. "They'll try to trap us," he said, "but they don't know how stubborn humans can be." The girl swallowed hard, pressing close to the rocks. She looked at him, confused, afraid, yet drawn to his unshakable will. For hours, the chase continued, the hunters circling, firing, retreating, then striking again. Daniel guided her through narrow paths, across steep dunes, through storms of dust that blinded even the sharpest eyes. Every moment felt like the end, yet every moment they survived. And with each escape, each narrow breath of life, the girl began to feel something she had never felt before: hope. Night fell, the desert glowing under the pale moons. The hunters' engines hummed in the distance, still searching, still hunting. Daniel built a small fire in a hollow between the rocks. Shielding it from view, the girl sat beside him, her body aching, her voice soft. "Why do you keep risking yourself for me? I was supposed to die in the sands." Daniel looked at the flames, his jaw tight. "I don't care what was supposed to happen," he said. "You're alive, and that means you deserve to keep living." She stared at him, the words sinking deep. No one had ever spoken for her life before. No one had ever fought to keep her breathing. Her stepmother had seen her as a burden. Her people had seen her as nothing. But this human, an outsider, a stranger, had carried her against the storm, had fought hunters, had bled for her. Her heart ached with confusion, but also with something warmer. Something that scared her even more than death. Far away, the hunters plotted. They would not stop, not until she was gone and Daniel broken. But inside the hollow of the rocks, the girl felt a truth stirring in her chest. The desert had tried to bury her, her family had tried to erase her, but this chase, this struggle for survival, had shown her something she could never forget. She looked at Daniel, his face lit by the dim fire, his eyes still sharp and watchful even in exhaustion. She whispered, "You fight like the desert itself, but you fight for me, and I don't understand why." Daniel turned to her, his voice steady, his words simple: "Because you matter. Even if the world told you otherwise, the desert wins." Howled again, carrying the scent of danger on the air. The chase was far from over, and the hunters would return with greater fury. But for the first time, the girl did not feel completely alone. As long as Daniel stood beside her, she believed she could keep running, keep fighting, and maybe, just maybe, keep living. The desert night was brief, and dawn came like fire across the endless dunes. Daniel had not slept, his eyes never leaving the horizon. The girl dozed beside him, but even in her sleep, her body twitched with fear. When the first light touched the rocks, the hum of engines returned, louder than before. The hunters were back. And this time, they came prepared. Dust rose on the horizon. Black against the golden sun, at least a dozen skimmers cut across the sands. Moving like hungry predators, the girl's eyes widened when she saw them. Her heart racing, her breath quick and shallow. "They'll kill us this time," she whispered. Her voice shaking, Daniel looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with resolve. "Not if we fight," he said simply. The hunters spread out. Surrounding the rocky ridge, their voices echoed across the desert, cruel laughter and threats carried by the wind. One called out, "Little one, you cannot hide forever. Come out, and we'll make it quick." The girl flinched, her body shrinking back into the shadows, but Daniel stepped forward, standing tall at the mouth of the ridge, his weapon in hand, his cloak whipping in the rising wind. "If you want her," he shouted, "you'll have to go through me." The hunters jeered, raising their weapons. But before they could fire, the desert itself roared. A storm was coming, fast and violent, the sky turning dark with swirling clouds of sand. Winds howled, the ground trembling beneath the fury of nature. The hunters hesitated, their skimmers shaking under the force of the storm. Daniel narrowed his eyes, gripping his weapon tighter. "This storm is ours," he muttered. "We fight on its terms." The battle began with fire and fury. Energy bolts lit the storm, blazing streaks through the swirling sand. Daniel fired back, his blasts striking true, knocking hunters from their skimmers. The girl crouched behind the rocks, her heart hammering, watching him move like the storm itself. Every shot, every step, was filled with defiance, with a refusal to surrender. But the hunters were many, and they pressed harder. Their bolts scorched the stone, their blades flashing in the chaos. Daniel fought fiercely, but even he was only one man. Blood streaked his arm where a shot grazed him, pain flashing across his face. Still, he did not stop. Still, he stood between her and death. The girl's fear burned into something sharper, something fiercer. She remembered his words, "You matter," and for the first time, she believed them. She grabbed a shard of broken stone and struck at a hunter who climbed the ridge. Her blow caught him by surprise, sending him crashing back into the sand. Her chest heaved, her hands trembling. But there was fire in her eyes now. Daniel saw her. And for a moment, pride flickered in his gaze. He fought harder. Using the storm as his ally, sand blinded the hunters. Wind threw them from their footing. Daniel moved with the chaos, striking fast, striking true. The storm was violent, but he made it his shield. The hunters cursed, their leader shouting above the roar, "Fall back, regroup. We'll finish this when the storm passes." One by one, they retreated into the swirling sands, their voices fading into the storm. Daniel lowered his weapon, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Blood dripped from his arm, his strength nearly spent, but his spirit unbroken. The girl rushed to him, her hands shaking as she tried to steady him. "You're hurt," she said. Panic in her voice. Daniel gave a tired smile, his voice rough but steady. "I've been hurt worse." He said, "What matters is that you're still alive." Her throat tightened, tears burning her eyes. She had been left to die, buried by the desert, hunted by her own kind. Yet this human, this stranger, had fought storms and blades to keep her alive. She whispered, "Why do you do this for me?" Daniel's gaze was steady, even in pain, because no one should be left to die alone. He said, "Not while I can still fight." The storm raged around them, but in the hollow of the ridge, there was warmth, not from the fading fire, but from the bond forged in battle. The girl sat beside him, her fear replaced by something new: trust. For the first time, she believed she was not a burden, not forgotten. For the first time, she believed her life had worth. Outside, the hunters regrouped, their voices faint through the storm. The battle was not over. The desert had not given up its cruelty, but inside the ridge, one human and one alien girl sat together, defying death. And though the storm howled and the sands shifted, they knew one thing for certain: they would face whatever came next, side by side. The storm passed slowly, leaving the desert quiet once more. The sky cleared, the twin suns rose higher, and the dunes stretched endless and golden. But inside the rocky ridge, silence lingered heavier than the sand itself. Daniel leaned against the stone wall, his arm bandaged clumsily, his body aching from battle. The girl sat close beside him, her alien eyes fixed on the horizon, her thoughts storming louder than the winds that had just died. They had survived, but survival was not victory. The hunters were still out there, regrouping, waiting for the next strike. And beyond them stood something darker, the stepmother who had ordered the girl's death. The girl's heart twisted, the memory of betrayal burning sharper than any wound. She clenched her fists, whispering, "Why did she hate me so much?" Daniel turned his head toward her, his expression steady though tired. "Because some people fear what they cannot control," he said. "They destroy what they don't understand." His voice carried weight, the weight of his own past, losses he had never spoken of. The girl looked at him, confusion softening into sorrow. "You don't even know me, yet you fought for me," she whispered. "Why?" Daniel's gaze was calm, his words simple but unshakable. "Because you're alive," he said, "and life is worth protecting, no matter who it belongs to." The words struck her harder than the storm or the hunters ever had. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of something new, hope. For the first time in her short life, she believed she mattered. Hours passed, the desert glowing with heat, the silence broken only by the wind. Daniel rose slowly, his body heavy, but his spirit unbroken. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll return, and next time, they won't run." The girl nodded, her jaw set. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled her. Together, they stepped out from the ridge and into the endless dunes. The chase began again, but this time it felt different. Daniel no longer carried only her body. He carried her trust, and the girl no longer stumbled as she had before. She moved with him, each step firmer, each breath stronger. They climbed dunes, crossed shadows, and followed the fading stars. Behind them, engines roared once more, the hunters relentless, but so was their will. When the sun dipped low and the desert burned red, the hunters came upon them again, a final battle, inevitable. Waiting beneath a sky of fire, the hunters spread wide, their leader stepping forward. His voice, cruel, human. "You should have left her in the sands. She was meant to die there." The girl trembled, the words cutting deep. But Daniel stepped in front of her, his weapon raised. "No one decides who deserves to live, but life itself," he answered, his voice fierce as the desert winds. The fight was brutal, fire and sand clashing, the storm of battle louder than thunder. Daniel fought with everything left in him, his strength drawn not from rage, but from refusal to yield. The girl, too, stood her ground, no longer hiding, no longer silent. She hurled stones, used shards. And even when her arms shook, she did not back down. Together, human and alien, they defied the hunters. When the dust finally cleared, the hunters lay scattered, beaten and broken. Some fled into the horizon, their engines fading into silence. The leader fell into the sand, his cruel voice silenced by Daniel's final strike. The desert grew quiet again, the only sound the heavy breaths of two survivors. The girl looked at Daniel, her eyes wide with disbelief. We won," she whispered. Daniel lowered his weapon, his shoulders heavy, his chest rising and falling. "We survived," he said. "That's enough." The girl stepped closer, her small hand brushing against his arm. For the first time, she did not flinch from his touch. For the first time, she felt safe as the sun set, painting the desert in gold and crimson. The girl whispered, "I should have died under the sands, but you gave me life again." Her voice cracked. Filled with emotion she could not hold back, Daniel looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "No," he said softly. "You gave yourself life. I only reminded you to hold on." The desert night returned, a cool wind sweeping across the dunes. But in that endless silence, something new began. The girl no longer felt like a forgotten shadow. She was alive, and someone had fought for her. Someone had shown her she was more than a burden, and as long as she remembered that, no desert, no storm, no stepmother could bury her again. Together they walked beneath the stars, their footprints side by side across the sands. She was alien. He was human. Yet in that vast, empty world, they were no longer strangers. She had been lost under the desert sands. Her life ended by betrayal. But one human had defied death, defied fate, and given her a new dawn.